Hey everyone, happy Tuesday. It's me. I'm coming to you from Los Angeles, California, because I'm going to be doing an interview with Beto O'Rourke. Beto, everyone always tells me I pronounce his name incorrectly, Beto. And we're just going to be talking a little bit about the power grid and about what's going on. It's almost the 1-year anniversary of this disaster in Texas. And I don't know if you all remember, if you live in Texas, you certainly do, when the power grid failed and the state, hi everyone, and the state experienced low below freezing temperatures. It's not connected to the national power grid. We're going to be talking to him about that. Millions of people were left without power for days. And I don't know if you all remember this, but over 700 people died. An 11-year-old boy was found frozen in his bed. A grandmother and 3 of her grandchildren died in a house fire as they were trying to stay warm. It was a disaster of just huge proportions. And right now, Beto, who is running for governor of Texas, is on kind of, here, let's see if I can find him. He's not here yet, but we'll wait for him. He is doing a campaign called Keeping the Lights On, and we're going to be talking to him about that and the state of the gubernatorial race. He's not polling that well. We're going to talk to him about that. But we're also going to talk about how Texas can avoid this in the future and what the long-term ramifications of this disaster really were there relief programs, et cetera, et cetera. Let me see if Beto is here. I see him. He'll join us momentarily, I'm sure. I'm not sure where he is right now. But if you all have any questions, hey, Beto, how are you?
Hey, I'm good. How are you doing?
Nice to see you again. Really, really appreciate it. And, we were talking about the disaster that took place almost 1 year ago today. I think it was over a period of time that began on February 10th. And you're working really hard with your organization to do what you can to upgrade the power grid in Texas, which was the big problem. Will you explain to people who are following us, Beto, what exactly happened almost a year ago?
Yeah, so last February, Texas had one of the worst winter storms in our history. And as temperatures plunged and people increasingly relied on their heaters to keep themselves warm in their homes, apartments, or office buildings, it created tremendous demand on our electricity grid. And what folks outside of Texas may not realize is we are on our own grid that is separate and apart from the rest of the country's electricity grid. So we're really on our own. But we are also the energy capital of planet Earth. So we produce the energy resources and extract those that power the generators for the electricity companies, for the transmission, to make sure that it's really never a problem. Well, because Texas didn't make the necessary investments in, for example, weatherizing that grid and protecting it against winter storms like the one we had in February, we started to see rolling blackouts across the state of Texas. And those rolling blackouts increased in intensity and length and duration until you had people who could not turn the lights on, whose heat stopped working, whose pipes then froze, and were really isolated from one another and the rest of the world because, as you know, you can no longer plug your phone in or your computer or connect to those who are outside of where you live. And in the depth of that darkness, so many Texans stepped up and literally, walked outside in the middle of the pandemic, knocked on their neighbor's door to check on them, to offer them, the opportunity to come to their house if they had a fireplace or some way to keep warm. We, in a group we have called Powered by People, initiated more than 1 million phone calls to Texas senior citizens to check in on them and make sure they're okay. And if they weren't, to get them help, whether it's transportation or water or food or a warming center where they could literally, stay alive.
Right.
And it was a terrible time for a lot of people. Millions lost power, and we'll never get a final count, Katie, but the conservative estimate is that just under 300 people lost their lives. There are other estimates that have the number over 700.
Yeah,
and these were folks who froze to death.
I was saying before you came on, the number we found in our research was over 700 people.
That's right. Yeah, the official state of Texas count is under 300, but there are many counties, dozens of them in the state of Texas, that don't have a county coroner or a medical examiner. So it's really hard to piece together the data. But I've seen that 700 number as well, and that seems to track what we are hearing back from people across the state of Texas. And these were folks like an 11-year-old boy in Conroe, Texas, who froze to death in his bed. A younger girl who died of carbon monoxide poisoning with her mother in their garage as they had the car on trying to keep warm. A veteran who left his home to get another oxygen cylinder from his truck, froze to death there. People who lost their legs because they got such bad, severe frostbite and still lived, but are living with the sustained injuries from what happened then. And the kicker for a lot of people, beyond the death and the misery and the suffering that everyone endured, is that because so many people made so much money on this, there were about $11 billion in profits made by some of the energy companies involved, who could charge many multiples what the typical spot price is for gas. And because this costs the state of Texas tens of billions of dollars in negative economic impact, all of our utility bills in the state are going up by an average of $20 to $50 a month to pay for this.
I want to be responsive to the people who are joining us. We have a lot of Texans watching, Beto, and many of more than one has described what happened last year as catastrophic. One viewer is saying, we know communities across the state were unprepared for the storm. How will you as governor support cities and towns to strengthen and build resilient infrastructure? I could not have asked that better. So thank you to the King Beza 14. I think that's what you're trying to do with this whole keeping the lights on program. But really, how are you going to prevent this from happening again?
It's interesting. In 2011, we had blackouts, not as bad as the ones in 2021, but enough of a warning sign to the state to take notice. In 2014, we had some similar problems. And so the answers were already available to us. We should first weatherize the grid. And that means that you're protecting not just electricity generation and transmission, but the gas supply. So natural gas fuels a lot of the generators that produce the electricity in the state. And the gas supply wasn't weatherized. And so you were literally freezing at the wellhead and unable to get this gas, here in Texas of all places, out in the pipelines to where it needed to be. So weatherize the gas supply, which still has not taken place. Two, we need to make sure that we're interconnected with the rest of the grid so that if we ever have this kind of severe weather event and we're not prepared or have more demand than we have capacity, draw that down from other states that might have excess generating capacity. The third thing is to help out the ratepayers. And these are the ones, Katie, who are paying an increase in their utility bills right now because of what happened in February of last year. We should be sending them money to weatherize their homes, invest in energy efficiency. That will, over the long term, lower their utility bills, and it will also create less demand on the energy and electricity grid, which helps that become a little bit more sustainable and reliable going forward. Those are three easy steps, not partisan, and most who are following this and understand the industry agree that we need to do this, whatever the politics of it are.
There's some people who don't understand it. This Victoria, I think her name is Nikolov, is writing, storms happen. There's nothing you could have done to prevent this. That seems rather short-sighted to me and a strange assessment of what happened in this very catastrophic situation.
Right. No, we can't accept that this is just going to happen because it wasn't an act of God or the force of Mother Nature. These were human decisions that were made that cost other human beings in this state their lives. And whether it was more than 200 or more than 700 who died, none of us should ever have to anticipate that we're going to lose a loved one because we can't keep the power going and the lights on. And Katie, as you know, there are other parts of the country that see winter storms far more severe than the ones that we witnessed in Texas last year. If you live in Iowa or Montana or New York State or Alaska for that matter, you're used to this. So the technology and the investment examples exist for us to follow here in Texas. We just have to have the political will to do the right thing. So
Well, I guess
that's the challenge.
Beto, is there the political will? You say this is not a partisan issue. If there, if you weren't going around the state talking about this or doing interviews like this one, would the power grid situation in Texas change? And have there been any moves in that direction?
Unfortunately, no. So ERCOT is the organization that manages the grid in the state of Texas. And by their own reporting within the last couple of months, if we were to have severe or extreme weather on the order of magnitude that we saw last February, we would not be able to keep the power on for the people of Texas. They estimate about a 40% generating shortfall right now. And that's because we have not, when I say we, it's our government, it's our governor, Greg Abbott, and the Republican state legislature. They've not required the gas supply companies to weatherize their part of the grid. And until that happens, we are still vulnerable. Now, why they haven't done that is open to speculation. They donate in the millions of dollars to those who have the regulatory oversight of their industry. And just one person in that industry whose company made $2.4 billion in February wrote the governor a $1 million campaign contribution check in the months afterwards. So if there's not a real conflict of interest, there certainly is the appearance of one. And that might explain what's going on right now.
I know that Texas is expecting another winter storm this week, temperatures hitting 14 degrees in some areas. Are you saying that we could see this happen again?
No, and what I think from listening to the experts on this is that as cold as 14 degrees or 19 degrees here in El Paso is going to be for those of us in Texas, it's nowhere close to what we saw last February with not only the cold and the winds, but massive levels of snow in some parts of the state. Snow, by the way, Katie, that came in handy when people's pipes burst and they were able to heat that snow up to use as drinking water if they had portable stoves, or dump it in their toilets to be able to flush them. But we're not seeing that level of winter storm this week, thank God. And all of us, Republican or Democrat, independent alike, are praying that the lights stay on and that we don't have a problem. But we've got to have something better than our prayers going forward. And that's why we've got to make these changes to fix the grid.
I know that you announced your candidacy for governor in November. Last November, you have a primary on March 1st. And winning the nomination does not seem to be, at least according to some polls, and polls can widely vary, but it doesn't seem to be a sure bet. I think it's 37% of voters in a recent poll said they view you favorably. 45 see you in an unfavorable light. What is the polling looking like for you, and what do you think is behind those numbers?
Well, in terms of the primary, you're right. I don't think you can take anything for granted in any election, and I'm certainly not. In terms of how the people of Texas view this campaign, that's my challenge and opportunity and job as a candidate to travel to every part of Texas and make sure that people know why I want to serve them and how their lives will be better if I'm governor. We're keeping this focus on jobs, on making sure that we have great public schools, and that we do common sense things that most of America has already done, like expand Medicaid so more people can see a doctor and fewer people die of diabetes or the flu or curable cancers. These are things that don't divide us, but in fact bring people together regardless of party. So having the opportunity over the course of this campaign, which still has another 10 months, más o menos, to reach the people of Texas, share with them this vision, and also listen to them about what's most important in their lives, is the way in which not only we run, but in which we win. And as you know, at the outset of the 2018 statewide race against Senator Cruz, no one gave us a snowball's chance of even placing anywhere close to competitive. And we came within 2.5 points, 215,000 votes from defeating that sitting senator, and in the process produced the largest voter turnout in Texas in a midterm since 1970. And that was all based on going out and traveling and meeting the people of the state. And this is critically important, encouraging people to sign up and become volunteers and knock on doors and carry a clipboard and from their own hearts, with their own voices, share why those campaigns were important to them. There are 44,000 people who so far have gone to betofortexas.com and signed up for a volunteer shift on this campaign just over the last 9 weeks. That gives me some encouragement as to our prospects in this race, and also our ability to be able to tell the story of this campaign and make sure that some of those numbers that you see reflected in early polls are changed for the better. And ultimately, the last poll, the one that counts on election day, has us winning over Greg Abbott.
And of course, that election was before the brouhaha that ensued after Ted Cruz went to Cancun, sort of in the middle of this crisis. What has the fallout been for him politically in the state of Texas?
You know, we'll know more about that in 2024, of course, if he seeks re-election. But in my opinion, and I may be in the minority here, though it was incredibly disappointing for him to leave with his family on a vacation to the Ritz-Carlton in Cancun while people were literally freezing to death in the state that he represents in the Senate, far worse was what he did leading up to and on January 6th of last year, when he encouraged people to overturn a lawfully, democratically, legally decided election for president. I don't think this guy wants to represent this state or even believes in representative government anymore. But because he's still serving in the Senate and his colleagues have, failed to censure him or remove him, that's ultimately going to be up to the voters here in the state of Texas. But the thing is, though he may have left the state, and though Greg Abbott was on Fox News blaming windmills and the Green New Deal, the people of Texas really stepped up, and they stepped up in a big, big way. I mean, folks took their neighbors into their homes. People set up ad hoc nonprofits that set up temporary housing all over the state of Texas. People like Matthew McConaughey, Representative Ocasio-Cortez, our group Powered by People, raised millions of dollars and distributed that to our fellow Texans to make sure that they were okay, especially because so many tens of thousands had their homes damaged from those burst pipes. The insurance claims on those home and apartment damages are in the tens of billions of dollars across the state of Texas. So there were a lot of good people who came together to help one another out, even if we could not depend on our government or those who represented us at the time.
Having said that, Beto, a recent Hill article or noted that, I guess cited, that 51% of Texas residents approve of the job Governor Abbott has done. So if what you're saying is true, why is there a disconnect between that kind of polling and what Governor Abbott or how he responded to this crisis?
Well, two things. One, I don't know if that poll is truly capturing the frustration and deep disappointment that so many people in Texas feel that in the energy capital of the world, you literally could not keep the lights on, and that the governor had ample warning about the vulnerabilities in the grid and did nothing. And even after the storm and the collapse of the grid, he still hasn't fixed the fundamental problems that contributed to it in the first place. And the second is, going to every part of the state that was affected and making sure that we connect the dots and ensure that people understand why this happened. It didn't just happen. It wasn't just the weather. This doesn't happen in other parts of the country or really in most of the developed world, but it happened here. And if there is not accountability for that, you are very likely going to see that again. And that would be the worst of all possible outcomes. So drawing attention to this and helping to inform and educate our fellow Texans is a big part of what we're doing as we drive throughout this state over the next 15 days or so.
I just want to be responsive to some of the other questions we sourced on social media. And actually, there's a question here. Someone is asking, if you become the governor, will you try and reverse the voter suppression that has already become law in the state of Texas?
Yes, This is the toughest state in the nation, bar none, in which to cast a ballot or register to vote or in any way participate in our politics. And we've got to have a response to that, not for Democrats and not for Republicans, but for every eligible citizen who wants to help decide the future and the fate of Texas and of this country and of their local school board, or in any way that they want to make sure that their voice is heard. Last year, Katie, or 2 years ago in 2020, in the most important presidential election of our lifetimes, 7 million eligible Texans did not cast a ballot. And it's not because they lack any love of our democracy. It's because of the obstructions of voter ID, one ballot drop-off box per county, the racial gerrymander of our districts, and closing so many polling places that people lined up in some instances 6 hours deep just to cast a ballot. Imagine how many people do not have 6 hours on election day to spend waiting in line, or just don't want to experience the indignity of doing that. So we have got to do better. And to the person who asked the question, yes, that is a priority for all Texans, regardless of political affiliation.
Let me ask you about another question we got, and I won't keep you for too much longer, Beto. You have a lot of stuff I know you need to do, but someone wanted to know, many people actually were asking about your plan to reinstate abortion rights in the state of Texas.
So instead of protecting the grid or focusing on public education or expanding Medicaid, our governor last year made it a priority to outlaw abortion, to outlaw reproductive health care freedom in the state of Texas. And this is at a time that Texas is already at the epicenter of a maternal mortality crisis, 3 times as deadly for Black women in this state as for white women. I mention that also, Katie, because when you close down a reproductive health care clinic, not only is it harder for a woman to get an abortion, but it makes it much more difficult to get a cervical cancer screening or to get any kind of reproductive health care advice or guidance or help, or even just to see a doctor at all in the least insured state in America. Furthermore, this law puts a $10,000 bounty on the head of anyone who helps any woman make her own reproductive health care decisions about her body and her future. It is completely dystopian and absolutely unbelievable if it were not happening in real time in this state. And the consequences are literally mortal for the women of Texas. You saw just within the last couple of weeks, the Supreme Court declined to take this case and to intervene, even though 49 years ago, almost to the day, Roe versus Wade was decided to ensure that women could make these decisions. So it's really now left to all of us. There's no cavalry coming in, no one riding to the rescue. The people of Texas have to decide this outcome through this gubernatorial election in November. So women's reproductive rights and the respect owed to every single person in the state, that's on the ballot this November.
Let me ask you about book banning. Actually, before we get to that, others asked how you're going to reach across the aisle and appeal to conservative Texans. The polarization is paralyzing in this country. I think so many people, not only in Texas, but across the country, are very frustrated that politics have replaced policy, and that people are so deeply entrenched in their ideology, nothing can get done. So I think, do you believe compromise is a dirty word, Beto, like a lot of people do? And if not, how are you going to reach across the aisle?
So I served in Congress for 6 years on the House Veterans Affairs and House Armed Services Committee. And every year that I was there, I was in the minority. The Republicans were in the majority. For 2 of those years, Donald Trump was the president. And so the only way to get anything of any significance done for the people I represented was to find consensus, common ground, and yes, to be open to compromise, which is really a dirty word on both sides of the aisle for most people. But I knew I couldn't come back to my constituents and say, you know what, these damn Republicans, they're in the way, they won't work with me, just keep reelecting me, and at some point I'll be in the majority, and then I'll do something for you. So, for example, we introduced legislation to improve outcomes for mental health care access for veterans, many of whom were denied the ability to see a therapist or psychiatrist at a time that veterans are taking their lives at record rates. By one estimate, 22 a day, every single day in this country. I submitted that to the Veterans Affairs Committee, couldn't find a Republican co-sponsor. until a colleague, Republican, said, Beto, I like this, but there's some parts that I want to change. I accepted his changes. We introduced it together to the House, passed unanimously, also passed through the Senate, and Donald J. Trump, a guy with whom I agree on almost nothing, signed that into law. And we have now helped so many more veterans get that care that they otherwise would have been denied. I want to bring that approach to being governor of the state of Texas. And those issues that you heard as my priorities at the beginning of this conversation, making sure that the best jobs in America are created here in Texas, focusing on our schools so that we have world-class public education, and then expanding Medicaid. None of them are controversial. None of them are on the fringes of either side of the political spectrum. And all of them begin with a basis in common ground where there are Republican legislators and Democratic legislators who've already worked on the building blocks of the solutions. I think that is the right way to set expectations for Texas. We're going to get those things done where we already find agreement, and that will help most people in the state. And I think it really reduces the partisan temperature and that polarization that you mentioned and the deep divisions that we're seeing. It affords us the opportunity to come together and unite and do something in common. That, to me, is exciting.
Let me ask you a couple quick other questions. One is on book banning, which I can't believe we're discussing in 2022, but Texas is one of many states that is limiting access to certain books like The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison, The Perks of Being a Wallflower, Michelle Obama, political icon. What would you do about this? And your reaction to this trend we're seeing in several conservative states?
It's so disappointing, and again, would be something that we would have a hard time even imagining a few years ago, and yet it's happening in real time here in Texas. And this is going to be the blueprint for much of the rest of the country if we don't stop this and come back to our senses. And look, we are a strong, independent people who have the strength to be able to read a book and have our preconceptions challenged without it weakening us or changing us fundamentally or doing anything to threaten us. When it comes to our own history, the history, for example, of Thelma White here in El Paso integrating higher education in the state of Texas in 1954, I think of that young 18-year-old woman trying to defy the all-white ruling on higher education in Texas. If she was strong enough and had the courage to do that, then our young people in this state today are strong enough and should have the courage to read her story. So yeah, let's come back to our senses. And this does not have to be and should not be a partisan issue. This should be about our Texas values of having the strength and independence of making our own decisions about what we read and what we don't read.
Sorry, you just froze there temporarily. And I wanted to ask you about Ted Cruz's comments. By the way, people are asking what you got at Whataburger. I'm not familiar with Whataburger, but they hope you enjoyed your lunch.
This is a reusable cup. So Katie, I ate so much Whataburger in the 2017 and 2018 campaign. I almost turned into a Whataburger. So I've been on a 3 or 4 year health kick since then. So this is just a memento from that campaign. But for those in Texas, you know exactly what Whataburger is. Is
it Whataburger or Whataburger?
It depends on where you live in Texas, but it could be both Whataburger or Whataburger.
Okay.
So,
all right.
Yeah.
Okay. I wanted to ask you about Ted Cruz's quote from yesterday. He said President Biden should not say he's going to appoint a Black woman to the Supreme Court. He should consider all eligible candidates. What's your response to Ted Cruz's quote about that? I've heard that from other people as well.
You know, I liked what President Biden had to say about this. It's time. And this is a commitment that he made as a candidate for this office. So the American people knew exactly not only who they were voting for, but what they were voting for, this commitment that he made to appoint a Black woman as a justice on the Supreme Court. I think it's great. I think it's terribly exciting. And it's also not unprecedented. So get this, and this is a point of pride as a dad. With my 15-year-old, we're running this morning before his school day starts. And he asked me about this, and I kind of shared with him my thoughts. And he said, my teacher, Mr. Reese at El Paso High, says that this isn't unprecedented, that Ronald Reagan made a commitment to appoint a woman as a justice to the Supreme Court, and Sandra Day O'Connor was appointed. And George H.W. Bush made a commitment to appoint a black man to the Supreme Court, and Clarence Thomas was the resulting nominee. Now I have not fact-checked my son on this or Mr. Reese, and there could be something lost in translation, but
Well, it sounds about right to me, I have to say.
I think the larger point is that, yes, it's about time. And we're so fortunate, I think, to have a president who gets that and who sees that. And from the potential nominees that I've seen described in the press, we as Americans are really lucky. And I cannot wait to see who it is that the president nominates.
Okay. Anything else you want to add before we let you go, Beto? Thank you, by the way, for making the time to talk to us. I think the last time we talked, you were someplace on the side of the road distributing water to people whose pipes had frozen or burst as a result of that storm almost a year ago. Anything else you want to bring up before we let you go?
I remember that too, Kay. We were in the Big Bend of Texas, where you have very, very spotty cell phone coverage. And I knew we had an interview coming up. And so it was just pedal to the metal as fast as we could until we got a bar. And not only did you talk with me then, which we so appreciated, but because you connected us to the wonderful people who follow you and are part of these conversations on Instagram Live, we raised, with your help and the help of many others, more than $1.4 million that we then redistributed to the people of Texas, especially those who had been evicted from their homes or had their homes damaged in the middle of this winter storm. And so a lot of help got to a lot of people when they really needed it. So thank you. And I want to thank everybody who watches you and follows you, because you have incredibly generous people who are part of your team. And so we in Texas are very grateful for that.
I really have smart, curious people who don't necessarily agree on the issues, but I do try to provide a platform for these conversations so people can hear directly from the horse's mouth. Not to call you a horse, Beto, but you know what I mean. And someone was asking me if I was going to interview Governor Abbott, and we'll certainly extend an invitation to him as well. I wanted to one last question, then I'll let you go, is Donald Trump on Saturday night at a rally north of Houston, so he was in Texas, said he would consider pardons for those involved in January 6th. He also spoke out against vaccine mandates, among other things. I guess the question I wanted to ask you is, how much influence does President Trump still have in the state of Texas? I don't even know if you can quantify that, but does he still have many people who are supportive of him and who would support him if he runs again in 2024?
I think there are a lot of people in Texas who recognize, and you mentioned this earlier on the issue of partisanship, that whether it is partisanship, whether it is corruption that we have in our politics, whether it's other challenges, what we have in America today in terms of our government isn't working or isn't serving enough people. And I think a lot of folks found in Donald Trump someone who promised to blow that up or to drain the swamp or to defy all the conventions of our politics that hadn't worked for so long. The problem, of course, is that you get something like January 6th, where you have people breaking the law, committing crimes, beating and ultimately killing a police officer and 4 other people on the day of. And subsequently, we've had others who have died and taken their own lives. This has been a terrible, terrible, terrible moment for our country. But I don't want to deny that there are people who are deeply frustrated with how politics has worked before now. What I hope is that they are open to something better and to someone else who will not do politics as usual, who will make sure that government directly works for the people of this state, and who don't have to find someone like Donald Trump, who so openly breaks the laws of this country and encourages other people to do that, but someone who's going to restore some order and accountability to our government, make sure that it works for everyone. So yes, I think he still has an influence and a role. I definitely see that diminishing. And I see the interest coming from some legitimate problems that people see in our government. I just hope they find solutions that are more constructive and more positive for all of us ultimately.
Some people are like, wow, Beto just won't stop running for office, and you've had some unsuccessful bids. And I'm curious what keeps you going. I mean, that's a pretty big softball, I recognize. But, you know, at some point, do you feel like, gee, they're not buying what I'm selling? I mean, obviously, you came extremely close to beating Ted Cruz, but I'm just curious, like, what keeps you putting your hat in the ring? What keeps you being the man in the arena, as Teddy Roosevelt talked about?
That's right. Do what you can with what you have where you are. That's something else that he said that definitely resonates with me. I think that's what we're all doing here in Texas. And, you know, I take a lot of comfort and encouragement in the fact that it's not about me and it's not about the party to which I belong, but it's about the people of this state. And I mentioned more than 44,000 folks have signed up to volunteer to knock on doors. They're the ones that drive and encourage and inspire me. The people that I meet along the way, you know, folks who, you know, will tell me, you know, look, I'm one of those folks that you talk about, Beto, who doesn't have insurance, who would benefit if we expanded Medicaid. I have glaucoma, I have diabetes, I can't see a doctor. You know, I'm not going to make it much longer unless we have a change here. Do we just say that, you know, good luck, you're on your own, or do we try to band together and help this guy and many other people like him out? And then do we try to change what is going on at this moment in such a deeply divided and polarized state and country, or do we become part of the problem? And obviously, so many of us have decided that we want to be part of the solution and part of the change. And no, it can't be any one of us. It cannot be Beto, and it can't just be the Democratic Party. It's got to be all of us. And we have to have a politics that includes and welcomes everyone. So if you're a Republican, and even if you disagree with me and will never vote for me, I want to serve you and I want to hear from you and I want to have a respectful conversation with you. If you're a Democrat, I don't want to take you for granted and assume that I know where you are or that you'll vote for me. And if you're an independent who's really sick of both of those parties, I hear you. I think all of us to a degree feel that right now, but we've got to find a way to come together and do something better, because if ever this country and our democracy, and for that matter, the state of Texas, were on the line, it's right now. This is the biggest test of our lives, and I would argue in the lifetime of this state, and I want to make sure that we come through. So I'm doing my part just like everyone else is trying to do their part. And I feel really good about that and great about the way that we're running this race.
All right. Well, listen, keep us posted. You have that primary on March 1st. And needless to say, we'll all be watching what happens. And again, really appreciate your time. You know, I'm trying to do interviews in a new and modern way because people get so now. And we really appreciate you helping us kind of, you know, have these conversations in this format. It's really helpful, I think, for everyone listening. So thanks a lot, Beto.
It's my pleasure and my honor. Thank you so much for what you're doing. And,
okay.
And thanks to all your viewers. Adios.
Thanks. Okay. Talk to you soon. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.